We've gotten to the book of Zechariah, and I would encourage everyone, this is a book that you should read. Even though you might not understand some of the details of the prophecies in the first several chapters, there's established God's intent and why He is doing what He's doing in the earth. It's spoken of several times here, and we'll look at it real soon. But I think it's important for you to read this. This would be a book that everyone, given the time that we're in, perhaps being maybe in the last days before the return of Jesus, that as we look at this, it'd be important to understand this because it's talking about the conflict of the nations against Jerusalem, against the Israelites, which we see in the world scene right now. We see the nations coming against Israel. We see the nations coming against Jerusalem. We see all the nations making their declarations and their decisions on what Jerusalem should look like. You should give part of that to the Muslims. It's like, it'd be like all the nations having a decision decide in Washington D.C. in America. You guys need to give this, some of this to the Russians, and so it's like we see this happening in the age right now. So it'd be really good to get a grasp on Zechariah. Zechariah, he actually prophesied during the same time that Haggai prophesied, is the return of Judah to from the Babylonian exile, and he began probably about 520 BC to talk here. And we get the timing of it once again in chapter 1, verse 1. It says, in the 8th month of the 2nd year of Darius. Now Darius was that ruler that followed Cyrus in the Medo-Persian Empire, which was the Babylonian Empire before that, which all the Jews were taken into. And so in verse 3 it says this, therefore say to them, thus says the Lord of hosts, return to me, declares the Lord of hosts, that I may return to you, says the Lord of hosts. So here's the exhortation. If you're going to take anything from the Bible, from this whole thing, you could take that and that would be enough. He says, return to me, so I may return to you. In the New Testament, you see the same language. It says, draw near to God and He will draw near to you. We see this, it's a consistent thing, and it's just laced throughout the Scriptures. God's not changed. A lot of times we change our pictures of what we think He's like. And so it says in verse 5, your fathers, where are they? And the prophets, do they live forever? Did not my words and my statutes, which I commanded my servants, the prophets, overtake your fathers? Then they repented and said, as the Lord of hosts proposed to do to us in accordance with our ways and our deeds, so He has dealt with us. So the Lord starts out explaining to them, says, much like the New Testament, when Jesus said, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words aren't going to pass away. And here God's saying, well, where's the prophets? Where's the speakers? Where's the ones that brought that to you? They're gone. But my words still stand, and look what happened. You disobeyed them, and the fulfillment of what I said happened to you. So we see that consistent thing once again throughout all of the Scriptures, and the Lord just trying to say, His word is very important, even if we don't think it means anything, and even if the messengers of that word are long gone. So in 1:14, we get to see the heart of the Lord and the reason for the events that are going to follow. In chapter 1, verse 14 says, so the angel who was speaking with me said to me, proclaim, saying, thus says the Lord of hosts, I am exceedingly jealous for Jerusalem and Zion. So all of the actions that are going to follow in this are predicated on this thing, that the Lord is jealous, exceedingly jealous for Jerusalem and Zion. Why? Because He's established His reputation on its preservation and on the fact that His people will maintain a residence in that place and that He will reign from there forever. So He's exceedingly jealous for Jerusalem and Zion. I'm afraid in this day we've kind of run into a time when people say, well, that was what He used to be. He used to, it was a phase that God went through. God was just going through a phase when He was just jealous for a while for Jerusalem and Zion. Well, I think He's pretty well, even in the following book, He says, I am the Lord, I change not, when we get to Malachi. I don't think He's changed. And I think He's probably exceedingly jealous for Zion and Jerusalem, and we'll see that. And we see it played out even through this book of Zechariah very, very clearly. Verse 15 of chapter 1, but I am very angry with the nations who are at ease, for while I was only a little angry, they furthered the disaster. Therefore, thus says the Lord, I will return to Jerusalem with compassion. My house will be built in it, declares the Lord of hosts, and a measuring line will be stretched over Jerusalem. So He's saying, you know what? I'm going to establish my house there. I'm going to live there. And we see he's been angry with the residents there. They're not living right, but it's not dependent on them. He's jealous over Jerusalem and Zion because of what he stated, because he's going to live there, because he's made declarations of what's going to happen there. So we move on here, and I'm going to pass over some things and look at some general themes more. In Joshua chapter 3, or in Zechariah chapter 3, there's an exhortation about Joshua. And verse 1, it says, "Then he showed me Joshua the high priest, standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right hand to accuse him." It's one of the few very distinct references to Satan, or the adversary or accuser. "And the Lord said to Satan, 'The Lord rebuke you, Satan. Indeed, the Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Is this not a brand plucked from the fire?' Now Joshua was clothed with filthy garments and standing before the angel. And he spoke and he said to those who were standing before him, saying, 'Remove the filthy garments from him.' Again he said to him, 'See, I have taken your iniquity away from you and will clothe you with festal robes.'" So here, we see that the picture of the cleansing from sin takes place here, using Joshua the high priest as a picture. Some people would even say this is a kind of a covered reference to the name of the Messiah that would come, Joshua, which in the New Testament, Yeshua, or we say Jesus from the Greek, is kind of a picture. Maybe even the Messiah is named by name here, that this would be the one that would come, named Joshua. And so we get the introduction of this character in verse 8, chapter 3. "Now listen, Joshua the high priest, you and your friends who are sitting in front of you. Indeed, they are men who are a symbol. For behold, I am going to bring in my servant, the branch." Now, we covered a little bit, if you recall, way back in Isaiah. There's spoken of the offspring, or the branch, or the offspring of Jesse, coming out of the root of Jesse, in Isaiah 11:1, and it's speaking about the Messiah coming. And it's like this branch, this mysterious branch character. We see that this looks like it's also a reference to Messiah. And so we go to chapter 4, verse 2, and it says, "And he said to me, 'What do you see?' And I said, 'I see, behold, a lampstand all of gold with its bowl on the top of it, 7 lamps on it, with 7 spouts belonging to each of the lamps which are on the top of it, and also 2 olive trees by it, one on the right side of the bowl and one on the left side of the bowl.'" So he sees this lampstand with a bowl on top of it, and there's an olive tree over here, and there's an olive tree next to it. And then it said, the angel was speaking with me, saying, verse 4, "What are these, my Lord?" He answered and said to the angel that was speaking to him, "What are these, my Lord?" And so in verse 5, "So the angel who was speaking with me answered and said to me, 'Do you not know what these are?' And I said, 'No, my Lord.' Then he answered and said to me, 'This is the word of the Lord to Zerubbabel, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. What are you, great mountain? Before Zerubbabel, you will become a plain, and he will bring forth the top alone, and with shouts of grace, grace to it.'" And so what we see here is we've got a picture, these 2 olive trees by a lampstand, and they're just feeding this lampstand. The olives going, so these olive trees are feeding the lamp, keeping the fire going, keeping the fire alive. And the word of the Lord from that, it's a little complex, but the word of the Lord I got from this is, "Not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts." And it's just saying that flame is kept alive, not by effort, but actually by this feeding of the very nature of the thing, that these trees that are feeding into this lampstand that has the bowl on the top of it. So they're feeding the bowl, and so it's not by might, it's not by power, it's by my spirit, in this case represented by the oil that's just feeding this lampstand. So we go to, on verse 7, it says, "What are you, great mountain? Before Zerubbabel you will become a plain. He will bring forth the top stone with shouts of grace, grace to it." So here's a whole other picture of how the battle is going to be won in God's kingdom, and it's not by power, it's not by might, it's actually by His grace that He provides. It's His power that He's providing by His own Spirit that brings us the victory in these situations and removes these great mountains that can be set before us.